Hi, I'm Dr. Knight, your superintendent, and today we're going to have a little bit of a lesson about the wildland urban interface. That's a big long word, so we like to call it a WUI, a W-U-I. I bet everybody can say WUI, but the wildland urban interface has to do with the beautiful areas that come through Oak Park that are wild, that come through the areas where we all live and go to school. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about the plants that live here and the creeks that run through the community, and it's not going to take that long. And then there's going to be an activity for you to go and visit maybe one of these areas, like one of the creek areas, the trails that go through them, and see how much you can find along the way. So let's get started. Let's look here. I'm going to try to turn this camera around, and then we're going to have a look at the creek that we're going to be following on this short walk. Okay, so this is one of the creeks. So this is Medea Creek, and this is what we call a second order creek or stream in the area. That means that it's fed by at least two first order streams that build into it. So if you look at a map of Oak Park, you can kind of see that you've got a big creek that runs through most of it, yet it splits. So one part goes up by the middle school, and another part goes on the other side through the duck pond. So those are called first order streams, and they flow into this one, which is a second order stream. And that's a good way of understanding a little bit more about what we call the riparian areas of the California area. Riparian is a long kind of a word, and it really only means something to do with a river or watershed or water area. So, and you can probably see as we walk along here today that this area is impacted by the water that's around it. In other words, there's different kinds of trees and plants that live in and around the water and those that don't. So we're gonna have a look at some of these as we go through here right now. So here's one of the first things that I'm noticing, which is a big California sycamore tree. In fact, there's a bunch of them up here. And these were not planted, they arrived here on their own. And these are native to California. That means they live all around in California. And they live in other places in the area as well. But they're big California sycamore trees. They're really beautiful. They are fully adapted living here in California. They do like living next to streams and creeks because they do like some water. So if you're walking around in the hills, you may not see one. But if you're walking around where there's a water source, you're very likely to see one. Another tree I see nearby here is an oak tree. And one of the things you're going to see is that there's a couple of different kinds of oak trees around in Oak Park. So this is one that we call the valley oak. And you can see the leaves that it has. They're different than one of the other oaks around here, which is the live oak, which we're going to see in a second. But the valley oak are these big giant ones that you see. I'm pointing up to it right now. They are really, really beautiful. They're very old. Some of them are 400 or 500 years old. And one of the ways you can tell it's a valley oak is that it loses its leaves in the winter. In fact, this tree is starting to do that right now because it's November. Let's look at another kind of oak tree that's over here. So this kind of an oak tree is what we call a live oak. And this tree is called a live oak because it doesn't lose its leaves in the winter. It keeps them green all year long. And as you can tell, if I can move a little bit closer here, you can see that they have a different kind of a leaf than the valley oak does. So if you haven't learned anything else so far today, you can learn to tell the difference between a live oak like this one and a valley oak like that one. Now there are big live oaks, but they're not as big as the valley oaks. In fact, here's a big live oak over here. And you can see it over there. So they do like living together. What's interesting is that they don't live together all over California. So what you see is we have a lot of valley oaks north of here and a lot of live oaks south of here. And in Oak Park and Ventura County, parts of LA County, we have both of them living together. So they do seem to get along nicely with each other. So some of the things you might notice here, we're walking along this stream bed, and there's a variety of different plants that are here. And you might think, well, how did these get here, and do they belong here or do they not belong here? So in just looking at this, you might think to yourself, which ones of these plants look like they might belong here, and which ones do you think don't? And we have some words that we use to describe these. So we call some plants native plants, which means that they're kind of supposed to be here. They live in the area by nature without anybody's putting them here. And then we have plants that are called non-native. That means that somebody put them here. And then we have plants that are called invasive. An invasive plant is a non-native plant that lives in an area and is doing damage to the ecosystem. So let's look at a non-native invasive plant right here, these palm trees. So they're sort of in between. They're native to California, these fan palms. They live around Palm Springs and stuff, but they're not supposed to be living here in Oak Park. So what happened is that people planted them in the area and their seeds get loose and carried around. And then they decide to take up residence on their own. And because these palms are living here, they're going to eventually grow into very big palm trees, that could be 100 feet tall. And in that process, they're going to suck a lot of water out of the creek. And then that's going to take water away from native plants that are right behind it. So like these are willows, for example, red willows, and these are native to the area, and they're supposed to be here. So so are some of these other grasses that are in here. Some of these are rushes. This is like different types that are living inside here that are supposed to be here, and they live here near the creek because it's wet. What you're noticing as we walk through, and what you already know, is that California is a really dry place. I don't know whether you've been counting it or not, but it hasn't really rained in almost 9 months. This is the middle of November, and hold on, there's a helicopter coming by. But anyway, it's the middle of November, early November, and it hasn't really rained since April. And so what kind of plants can live without any kind of rain for 9 months? So the only kind of plants that can really do that are what we call Mediterranean plants that live in a climate like ours, where it doesn't rain very often for 8 or 9 months of the year. Let's take a little closer look at this stream and the water here. I'm sure you're seeing that this water doesn't really look too incredibly healthy. That would be a bit of a concern, if you're looking at the water and it's like, I don't know that I would want to drink this water. In fact, I'm not sure if you even want to touch it. So to understand a little bit more about that in water and urban interfaces, it's important to understand some things about what happens in our yards and in our sidewalks, and things about talking about controlling litter and other things. When people fertilize their lawns and throw a lot of fertilizer on their grass, and then it rains or the sprinklers are on, and then it washes it down into the street, it eventually wanders into the stream. And when that happens, what happens is that the nitrogen that's designed to make your lawn green grows a lot of algae inside the water, which you can see here. And then what happens is that we get a little bit of a situation going on where the water becomes toxic for fish and other kinds of things because it's just too much nitrogen in it. I've actually tested this water before. I haven't done it lately, but I did it before, and I found that it had too much nitrogen in it, and that it wasn't something that would be safe for fish to live in, for example. So that's something of concern. The other thing is like people always say, when you walk your dog and the dog does a poo, you better pick it up. And one of the reasons for that is that if you don't, when it rains, it will wash into the creek. And then we have the same sort of thing happening, and that is that we get a nitrogen load going on in the creek, and that causes problems with the algae again and makes the water toxic for everything. So ideally, what we want to do is to keep the water clean. The way we do that is we don't use too much fertilizer on our grass, and we don't overwater our grass so it washes into the street. When we walk our dogs, we pick up after them. If we litter or something, we lose paper or something, we pick it up so that we don't have that flowing into the stream. Because once we have that going on, then it gets down here and it flows into the streams. As we continue our walk here, we are seeing a tree we haven't seen before. Let's have a look at this one. So this is kind of neat. This is a nice big cottonwood tree, and it's pretty big. It goes from the creek and starts heading up here. It's a big one. It looks like wow, is this an oak tree? No, clearly the leaves are different. And it's not a sycamore tree. So we had to learn a little bit more about it. So best way to learn about a tree is by looking at its leaves. And we kind of see that this is not either a sycamore and it's not an oak. So this is what we call a Fremont cottonwood tree. And this tree it's a native tree, lives in California, lives in other places around California also. And then growing over here, let's see what we've got going over here. So this is an interesting big giant shrub or bush. And it's got some dried flowers on it, got an interesting leaf. And this is what we call mule fat. Mule fat. So I'm not sure why it's named that, but it's called mule fat. And it's native here to California, likes living near the stream beds. And then across the creek bed, there's a very big tree again growing. And what's interesting about this one, see if we can zoom in on it again. This is one you've seen before. Maybe some of you recognize the leaves of it. So if you do, then you recognize it as being the red willow, but this is what they turn into. So pretty good sized trees, as you can see. Again, living very close to the stream bed so that we know that its roots are going into the water. So you wouldn't find red willows living in the middle of the hills, for example. So as I'm walking along, I see this weed that's growing here, which looks kind of interesting. It's getting my interest going. It's starting to bloom now. This is western ragweed. And this is something that if you have allergies, that people are often allergic to. And if your allergies get worse in the fall, like now, it could be this that you're allergic to. Now, what's interesting about it, and we can learn something from this, and that is it's blooming now in November. Now, most plants that you understand they probably bloom in the spring. But California native plants like to bloom in the fall. And the reason for that is that tomorrow it's supposed to rain, for example, the first time in many months. And so they know that they're evolved or adapted to living in a situation where it rains in the winter, and that's when they can grow. And they also know that after the spring passes, there isn't going to be any rain for 6 to 9 months. So if you were a plant and you were going to put out seeds, you wouldn't want to put them out at a time when they're not going to get watered by nature. So the western ragweed and a lot of the plants that we see are blooming now in the fall, which is kind of cool. And that's typical of plants in what we call a Mediterranean climate. And the Mediterranean climate can be found obviously in the Mediterranean, like in Italy and Spain and places like that. It's also found in Chile. It's also found in Western Australia and in South Africa, but not a lot of other places. So that's what's a cool thing about living in Southern California. And I'm looking over here down into the creek bed again, and I'm seeing one of our old friends, which is the giant invasive fan palm. Again, that shouldn't be here. The high school sometimes and working with the Parks Department comes through here and tries to dig these out so that they don't continue to spread themselves around the creek. Now here's something fun that you may not know about. This is another little shrub that you would normally just pass by and not think much about, but it is also blooming in the fall, and this is called tumbleweed. And you may have seen tumbleweeds before, and they're a native plant here in Southern California, and they're really cool. They're not really just a nuisance when they get big and then they die and the wind blows them. They're really kind of a neat plant, as you can see. They're very beautiful when they're green and make a very pretty flower like that. Now here's a plant we haven't seen yet, and it's kind of interesting. It's very green. It's got some neat flowers on it. Again, how cool to be seeing these beautiful flowers blooming this time of the year. And this is called coyote brush or coyote bush. So it's neat that we have a plant that's named after an animal that we see around Oak Park quite a bit. And this is a native in this area. It grows in a wider range too, not just in California. But it is something that if you're walking around, you could see and you can identify, oh, that's coyote brush. Now here's another tree we haven't seen yet, and it is beautiful. Look at the blooms all over it. Let's get a close-up of some of these. Very green. Even the stems are green. So you can't miss this one because of the beautiful yellow flowers this time of the year. And it's got a beautiful, healthy green foliage. And this is called tree tobacco. Now this is actually related to real tobacco, like they make cigarettes out of. But I don't think you can smoke this. But it is interesting that it's a wild form of native tobacco that lives here in California. It's not invasive, so it's an actual plant that lives in California. It's really pretty. Matter of fact, there's a bird up here that likes living in it. Let's have a look at the bird. Oh, I think the bird has flown away. But as you can see, there are certain types of birds that are attracted to these flowers. And maybe the insects that live around here. So guaranteed, if you go for a walk along the creek, you're gonna find this tree tobacco. So here's another problem plant that we have here. You might recognize the leaves as fig leaves. This is a fig tree. This is not a native plant here in the area. It's an invasive. What happens is that, the birds eat the seeds and they poop them out, and then they grow kind of anywhere, especially by water, because these take a lot of water. So again, this is a tree that's invasive because it's stealing water from the creek, which the native plants that are around it could actually really use. So it's important that we not try to plant invasive plants in our yards. We cannot plant only native plants in our yards. That's really impossible. And it's really not necessary. We just don't want to plant trees or plants that get loose in the wild, especially in an area like Oak Park where you have a lot of wild land. So like you wouldn't want to be really planting fig trees in your backyard, knowing that there's nothing you're going to be able to do to stop them from getting loose into the wild. And when they do get loose, they're going to cause some problems. Now this is an unusual looking plant here. And you can just sort of already tell by looking at it that this is not a native plant, that this probably doesn't belong here. This is castor bean, and it is an invasive plant that get loose. And you may have heard of castor oil. It's a crop, and it's gotten loose here in the wildland in Oak Park and all over Southern California. So you can see these grown kind of everywhere. And they are a Mediterranean plant. You can see that by the fact that it's blooming right now in November. Very unusual. So very happy to be living here. And it doesn't even need a lot of water. This one's pretty far from the creek. So it can live almost without any water at all, which is pretty amazing. So we're continuing our walk, and in case you didn't realize it, we're in the Medea Creek Natural Park. It runs right through the Santa Monica Mountains recreation area in our WUI, our Wildland Urban Interface. We're just following the creek, and we're following it to the side that branches off to the east into a first order stream. And here we can see something that's kind of interesting. It's a big dead bunch of trees. Looks like it's like willow trees. And these provide important places for animals to live in and to nest. So this is why these are never removed or cleaned up, so to speak, because they really need to be here like this. And in nature, no one would be cleaning this up. So I can hear kind of birds going through it and around here. I just heard a crow. And it can be a really great place for a habitat. Here's another plant we haven't seen yet. It looks similar to some other ones, so it can be a little bit tricky, but this one is what we call a longleaf wattle, W-A-T-T-L-E, I think. And what's interesting about wattles is that they can be used in building things. And we believe that the Chumash, who were the Native American or the indigenous people who lived in this area of Oak Park, may have used these for building different kinds of dwellings. So they're a native. This is a great plant. This is a great plant that you see around here. And this one's called sugar bush, or you might call it a sumac. That's another name for it. Now you've heard that word before. There's even a school named that nearby. And also look at this. All this beautiful new growth. It says to itself, I think it's gonna rain soon. I'm gonna put out a bunch of new growth. It's gonna be beautiful. Again, most plants do this in the spring, but native California plants do it in the fall. Beautiful sugar bush or sumac. In fact, look at this one. Look here. We have some really neat flowers that are starting to come out and bloom. And they're gonna attract all kinds of insects, including native California bees. Did you know that there's about 1,500 species of bees in California, and 1,499 of them are natives? But the one you see the most is a honeybee, and that's not native. They were brought here. But there's a lot of native bees. You have to look closely to see if you can find them. I don't see any here today, but this would be a good place to look for them because they like to go on native plants and flowers. This is a big bunch of sumac. Again, right along our trail here along the creek. Now I'm in a part of the creek where I can see a bunch of different kinds of plants. So this is what we call Mexican feathergrass. So it's native here. It goes all the way from a little bit north of here all the way down to Argentina. So it's not exactly, just a California native like a lot of these plants. Here's a bunch of sumac up here. Here it is. The sumac we were looking at before. Remember, do you recognize this one? The coyote bush? Yep. And if I look over here, see if we can go up a little bit, there we have a really neat oak tree. Let's see if we can zoom in on it and see what it is. By looking at the leaves, you can tell it's a valley oak. Another oak tree over here. There's some willow trees over there on the other side. Yep. Coming across over here, I can see, let's see what we got going here. We got some coyote bush, and above that, I see some tree tobacco. There's some, and here's some more on this side. Coming up, here's a bunch of tree tobacco growing amongst the sumac. So wow, look how fast we learned something about these plants and trees that you probably walk by all the time and didn't know their name. So we just come across another plant we haven't seen. This is kind of an interesting one. It's a feathery looking thing. It's also looking really green and growing a lot right now. Looks like it might want to bloom or something. At least it's got a lot of new growth on it. This is called tamarisk. That's probably a word you've heard before around in Southern California. But it's a tamarisk bush. Very happy right here. And I'm coming over here into the creek area. I wanted to show you something I thought was interesting. So if you can see it now, there's this really interesting tree branch here. And it looks to me like this is an oak tree that maybe fell over in the wind and then was burned in the fire, in the Woolsey fire. So we know that the Woolsey fire came straight through this creek area. You wouldn't really know it now because everything has kind of come back a couple of years later. This thing is still, the trunk of this tree is still quite blackened, as you can see. It's making kind of a cool bridge over this area. It's kind of a good time to tell you about how, like all of these plants that we've seen actually don't care that much about fires. The oak trees have very thick bark. They call it the cambium. It's very thick, and the fires don't really bother them very much. They may look black and burns all the leaves off after the fire, and you think, oh my God, the tree is dead. But come the next spring, after some rains, the fires usually happen in the fall. Then they start to come green just like this. So they can manage living in the fire. Our houses and things like that, of course, don't. But we've decided that we wanted to live in these areas like this, so we're in an area where there's going to be fires. Normally, in the chaparral, which is this kind of area, what we call a chaparral, the fires burn about every 20 years or so. But that doesn't mean that they can't burn more frequently. And we've been seeing them more frequently in our area, probably because of a lot of different reasons. Like, we think the last one was started by power lines, so that's not really a natural cause of a fire. So that's one of the reasons we probably have them more frequently than nature would probably give us. But then people do things where, like, this looks like a oak tree. It's a valley oak that maybe somebody planted. It just kind of looks like it, doesn't it? Something unusual about the oak trees, however, if you look at them over here, is that you see them growing together. And why do you think that is? And that's because, think about it for a second. We know that oak trees reproduce by producing acorns, and the acorns fall around the oak trees, and then little saplings grow from there. Something weird about trees, or interesting maybe, I don't know if it's weird, but when the trees start to grow that are related to the tree that they fell from, or that they came off their roots or their acorns, they will sort of take care of these trees, because sometimes they're in the dark because of the shade from them. And then what happens is that the trees are able to care for their, if you want to call them their children, by feeding them. Their roots connect, and then they grow. And then eventually, when the parent tree passes away or dies from the wind or age, then the little tree has a better chance of living, because it needs the light to live. So you can see that they kind of grow in these little groups like this. So these trees are more than likely related to each other. If we were to test their DNA, we could determine that. And if we see over here, for example, if we observe carefully this valley oak, which is a really beautiful tree. Part of it looks like it's dead on this side. And the reason for that is that the live oaks that are around it are shading it, so that those the leaves on that side of the tree are of no more use to the tree, so it doesn't keep them going. So it looks like they just sort of die. But this tree, if you look up at the top, has plenty of green ones, so it's perfectly fine. It manages to adapt in the shade and just grows higher and higher. It's not letting the neighbors here that it's not very happy with, shading itself. It's not letting it bother it too much. And this big oak tree has a bunch of little saplings that belong to it. They are all valley oaks. So it's going to show the live oaks that are living around it that it's got everything under control, and that when it eventually dies, these little ones here are going to take off, some of them, not all of them, but maybe like this one, it's getting really healthy and will grow to be old like this one, and like its parent. And these trees are super old. They can live to be 400 years old. So if you want to put it in a historical perspective, some of these trees were this size 400 years ago, in the year 1620, when the Pilgrims first came to America. This tree was probably a little one like that at that time. And now look at it. And it's old. It probably has fewer days ahead of it than it's had behind it. That's part of nature. But that's why there's so many young ones around it that are going to be growing up and, in essence, are being taken care of by this tree. But after a period of time, it's going to make too much shade, and these won't be able to grow. So if when this tree dies, it'll allow more light in here to let these little ones take off. Now, this is probably one of the most beautiful oak trees in Oak Park. And it's a valley oak, as you can probably tell. The live oaks don't get quite this big, and they don't twist around quite so much. So this is a magnificent tree, probably 400 or maybe even 500 years old. So as you can tell, the dogs that are around me are wanting to explain about the oak tree also. It's just really beautiful. It's definitely worth the walk on this trail just to see this tree. Now, it's getting into the winter. Now, this tree will lose its leaves in the winter time and will be bare and will act more like a traditional oak tree, and it will have its leaves come out fresh again in the spring. And this tree lives by setting a root down about 20 feet under the ground, and that's how it gets its water. Here's another live oak forest that we come across. Lots of young trees inside here and one big older one. We're going to end our walk here just by having a look and a rest by this beautiful stream by Medea Creek. Got a lot of water right here, and this water looks pretty clean. And I just thought I'd leave you with a couple of thoughts. Like, if you're interested in learning how to identify these plants, you learned a lot of them today, but you can get an app on your phone called Seek, S-E-E-K, or another one, if you're a little older, called iNaturalist. And those apps will help you. You can take a picture of the plant that you see, and then if you have a connection, or you can do it later, it'll tell you it'll tell you what kind of a plant it is or give you an idea. And then other people will look at it and see if you're right or not. So you're actually contributing to science by saying, oh, we have these plants living here. We didn't know that. And so you're helping every time you go out, and you can identify plants in Seek or iNaturalist. And if you're really interested in birds, there's another one called Merlin, like the magician. Merlin is a great app for doing birds. But you can use iNaturalist and Seek to also do birds and skinks and lizards and things like that we have around here. So there's ways. And the idea here is, I think on our walk today, is that you've learned something about observing nature. And anybody can do this. And it makes you into what we call a naturalist. So a naturalist looks at things and looks at them closely and tries to learn and observe through observation, basically. Learn new things. And from that we can determine more information about the natural world that's around us. And it's super easy to do. And you're really lucky that you live in Oak Park, because it's not named that for nothing. There are a lot of beautiful oak trees and scrub oaks and other kinds. And you can become an expert in the oak trees and the native plants of California just here in Oak Park. So I hope you'll enjoy doing some of this on your own. I'm going to explain an assignment in a minute. Now here's another interesting plant we haven't seen yet. This is called Toyon, T-O-Y-O-N, Toyon. And again, look at the seeds and berries that it's producing right now in the fall. Very beautiful time to be looking at these. But Toyon is a plant that you will find along the creek, and you'll also find it in other parts of Oak Park and other parts of Southern California. It has, look at the leaves, they're really sort of jagged on the end. And then of course, at this time of the year, it produces these incredible berries or fruit. There's a big giant group of it here, which I hadn't seen yet on the trail today. All right, so I'm back from my hike and I'm a little bit hot, but I did want to tell you about the assignment or something that you could do that would be really fun. I guess I'd call it an activity. And that is that you could walk the Medea Creek Natural Park trail, which is all paved if you want it to be, or you can go off on some of the other areas of it. But it's real safe and it's real fun. You wouldn't do it on your own, of course, or alone. You would do it with an adult in your household or your family that's allowed to be with you right now. And you can go down along there and walk, and let's see how many plants you can identify. Did you find the same ones that I found? You could all do this anywhere on the trails in Oak Park. Can you find any of the plants that we found on our video today? Or can you find some new ones that you don't know what they are? And you can either send a picture of those to me if you want to, or you can download Seek, S-C-E-K, or iNaturalist, and you can try to figure out what they are yourself and contribute to the community science that we're doing. Now, another thing that naturalists do is they take notes and draw pictures of things and ask certain questions. So one of the questions they ask is, I wonder about. So I wonder why that tree that we saw was broken in pieces and fallen across the stream. I wonder when that happened. I wonder if it was from the fire. I wonder if it was from lightning. They ask those things and they write them down. And another thing they say is, I noticed. So I noticed that all of the plants that we saw today have new green leaves on them and are blooming. So you don't have to know why that is, but it's something that you noticed. And I told you why, but you can learn why that's the case. And then the other thing that we say is, it reminds me of. So for example, on those plants that are blooming, you could say, it reminds me of plants that bloom in the spring in my backyard. But wait a minute, this is November, so why are they blooming? So now we have a good question that I have to wonder about based upon something that I noticed. So that's a great way of being a naturalist and walking around a natural area or someplace that you haven't been before. And then the other thing we do is we do some journaling. So let's flip this around and look at my journal that I did. And I'm a little bit embarrassed of it because I'm not the best drawer in the world, but I'm trying to learn how to do it and just kind of take note of things. So this is a page in my journal, and I put in here, the date that I did this. I put the time, I put where I was, I put the weather, and then something that I happened to notice, which was that sugar bush or the sumac that we were talking about earlier today. And so I wrote a little bit about it and what I saw. I didn't really know a lot about it, but I just kind of like explained what I could see by spending a few minutes with it. And then, this is where I don't want you to laugh, but then I decided to make a drawing of it and label it. And I used the Latin name for it. That's the name we use if we're scientists. You don't have to use that. I could have just put sumac or sugar bush on it. And I tried to include in my drawing the things that were important, like maybe those flowers are at the end of it and the shape of the leaves, including how the veins on the leaves are and how they're shaped. Because we noticed that, for example, you might confuse this one with the toyon, but the toyon has a very distinct leaf that's jagged, so you would know that this is not toyon. And so I made a drawing of it, which was kind of fun to do and kind of relaxing. And then I can keep it in my journal, like what other naturalists have done before, which is kind of fun. So that's something you can do. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I have this one that I bought on Amazon. You know, it's designed for like, if it's a wet day or raining, you can take that with you. But you can just use a notebook or some pieces of paper or you know, kind of whatever you really want to do. And you can draw birds or animals or plants or, you know, whatever you really want to draw. You know, you can draw maps in here. I've drawn maps of places I've been on trails. This is a scrub jay I drew. So it's not a very good drawing. Again, you're probably laughing at the way I draw my bird, but I'm trying to learn how to do this. So I'm not really good at it yet, but I think I might be able to get good at it over a period of time. And I put in here, even though I don't have colored pens or pencils, I was explaining in here the color of things, and even some questions here that I thought about when I was drawing this based upon where I found this bird. So anyway, I hope that you have a exciting time trying to. Anyway, I hope you have a good time on your walk. I hope you'll do the walk, and I hope you'll enjoy it. I think that it would be fun for you to do. And you can send me some pictures if you like. I'd like to do that. Your teacher has my email address, and if you don't know what it is, it's tknight@opusd.org. And I'd be happy to identify those plants for you or run them through iNaturalist myself if you send a good picture. You can send more than one if you want. And if you have some drawings that you did that you'd like to share, I'd be curious about those too. And we might even put some of them up on the district's website. So anyway, I hope you have a great day and enjoy your walk. Thank you.